Hey, what's up guys? Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. Today I'm stepping you inside of a session of a sample-based beat that I started working on a couple months ago. If you watch any of my past beat making videos, sample-based tutorials, you know that a lot of time I chop my samples in MIDI format, but there are certain situations where I work actually in audio format. Many times I'll take this approach when there's a really great loop, or there's some other reasoning why I may want to do some sort of time stretching. I'm not going to be able to manipulate that in MIDI format like I would in audio. So what I want to do in this video is just show you kind of the different approach that I took, the way the track started, and the way it's kind of progressed along. I've actually broken this down into about four audio tracks to kind of show you the step-by-step process that I've gone through to make this track what it is now. Now keep in mind this isn't finished. I've got some other minor things in the arrangement to figure out, but I've got more or less a verse sequence now, which I didn't have before. It took me putting this track aside for a month or so, coming back to it with fresh ears, having new inspiration to finalize the track. Typically, if this was the sample I drag in, I would usually go in here, enable the warp engine. I would pick my slice points, chop the sample up, and I'd be good to go and trigger my samples on my MIDI controller. Part of it also was the timing that I was hearing in the sample, already anticipating some sort of a time stretch, but I want to go ahead and just show you, give you a preview of the sample first, and then I'll step you through kind of my process for this so far. Now my first step with this, working with this sample in audio format and not chopping it up in MIDI, was in Ableton to make sure first that this warp engine was disabled here. Because the sample's slower and I know that I want to speed it up, instead of time stretching right from the beginning, what I want to do is work in the transposition. So I've disabled the warp engine. If you focus on this track up here, this highlighted track, you'll notice that as this is unwarped and I shift this up, that this audio is going to get smaller. Now if you have the warp engine enabled and you do the transpose, it'll still shift the pitch, but it won't change the timing. And that's where I talked about if you're not careful, you can sometimes get those artificial mechanical sounds in your sample. And so my first step on this was to work with the transposition to try to get the speed. And I don't really care too much about the pitch at this point. I'm really focused more on something in the 90 BPM range, is usually in the 85 to 95 BPM range is usually the type of tracks that I work on. So I'm trying to find a tempo somewhere in that range. It doesn't have to be exact at first because I am actually gonna have to do some time stretching to this sample anyway. I'm just kind of looking for a rough tempo in that area. So that was pretty much the first step for me because I had already listened to the whole sample. I had identified 2 8-bar loops that I was definitely going to use, or at least try to use and incorporate into this beat. So that was the start of one loop, and the second loop was later in the track. Okay, so those are roughly in the arena of the BPM that I have my DAW set to, but the loops are not exactly right. And so this is the next step, more or less, in my process. I'm taking these rough loops and I'm now enabling the warp engine with my 7/2 step transpose. And from there, I'm doing further warping. And so in order to get these warp markers right and get them where I wanted them, this was basically playing this rough loop like this with the metronome playing and listening for where the hits needed to come down with the metronome. And I was just making minor adjustments as it was playing through. So for instance, if I come back up to the original one I was working on, I can kind of even get a sense by looking at the audio. See, I start hearing it kind of speed up a little bit there. Sometimes it can be very monotonous work depending on how the sample is recorded. Sometimes you'll find phrases that are not necessarily on time because things are being played live and they're not necessarily rigid on a set metronome. So that's where something like this can come in handy, but a lot of it is just trial and error with the metronome, then adding drums and seeing how everything sounds together. And so after I had these two loops, I went ahead and added drums. I added a bass line to that. So I had basically the 16 bars that I had to work with. But at this point I wanted to develop kind of a verse track or a verse sequence, but I didn't want to have to go back and re-chop the sample because like I said, I'm already working with this in audio format. I already had everything kind of warped the way that I liked. So this was the approach that I took. And this was a lot of trial and error. So for instance, when this first hit comes down, when this loop starts, it's just the instrument. It doesn't contain any vocal. And so my approach was to take that hit right there and kind of copy it over. And really what I want here is I want like a delay effect. Now one approach I could have taken with this is to just put this one hit here and then actually add a delay effect. What I did was, I've talked about this technique before, but you can emulate a delay effect by just changing the velocities on these hits. Basically, I'm just changing the volume. So this is at 0 dB. Take this one down to say -6 or -5 maybe is what I had. I think the next one's like -10 or -11. And this is not an exact science. This is trial and error, but I'm just giving you another alternative. And I don't remember all these numbers, but I don't know how it's going to sound, but we'll see. This was just the start of this verse sequence, and I went through, and I'll play you just here in a second what I have come up with for the verse. You can kind of see it here, all of these little meticulous chops, and it was just basically copying and pasting certain pieces of this audio, manipulating it, trying some things out. This might seem kind of like a convoluted process. I just kind of went with the way that I'd already started the track, just let it kind of evolve on its own. So this is what that verse sequence sounds like. The vocals are still prominent in some of those areas, and so I will be doing some further manipulation as far as EQing and filtering. So that's all I really wanted to show you today, just that approach and the way that I'm chopping the sample in audio format. Other than that, I'll just play you a little snippet of how this sounds with the drums and everything. If you like this video, please make sure to thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Also feel free to check out the other music production tutorial and tip videos like this on the channel. A link to the new TCustomz sound effects kit will be in the description. Say thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.